Good evening, tributes, and welcome back to another Tales of the Hunger Games After 100 video. My name is Robo, and I will be your host for today's episode. As usual, I'd like to thank the wonderful Christian Blanco for creating the series in the first place, as well as Andrew Maclaine for designing some of the wonderful, spectacular art used inside this episode. I'd also like to mention that there is a Tales of the Hunger Games Discord server for this series, linked in the description. I'd also like to thank Red Dragon for proofreading and editing some of the content in this video. But without further ado, let's hop straight into the episode. After the events of the war from the previous year, peacekeepers in their districts were given pay raises, and more were hired to help keep order within them. Viscera Maddox, victor of the 108th Hunger Games, arrived in District 3 after getting criticized in District 4. Once in the district, Viscera was taken to a holding room within the town hall, and from there, she waited for the reaping to start. After Mayor Shock had given his speech about the importance of the Hunger Games, Viscera stepped forwards with a sigh. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Gif Schneider give her a slight wink as she reached into the female reaping bowl. She rummaged around in the bowl before slowly drawing out a name and walking to the front of the stage. Up front, she opened the paper and read out the name of 16-year-old Optica Dennis. Optica swore and raised 2 middle fingers to the camera before running to the stage. The newly appointed commentator and interview lead, Sif Heavensby, commented that she liked how Optica's hair was dyed with fashionable streaks of yellow. Although she was alone in the commentating box, Sif gave her thoughts on Optica, who had now walked to the stage and stood angrily beside Viscera. Viscera then walked over to the male reaping bowl, where she drew a name and announced it to be 17-year-old Fender Hindenburg. Compared to his district partner, Fender was much bulkier and seemed more confident in himself as he walked up to the stage. Sif commented that Fender's bulky demeanor was not something frequently seen by tributes from his district. Once Fender had reached the stage and shook hands with Viscera, Mayor Shock stepped forward to dismiss the district. However, Optica gave a 3-finger salute, which caused peacekeepers to restrain her. Both tributes were subsequently taken to the train station, without being allowed to meet their families. This was because during the District 12 reapings, a male tribute by the name of Galen received a knife from his mother, which was only noticed when he left the train. When Fender and Optica had reached the train station, Peacekeeper used metal detecting machines on them, and once the Peacekeepers had proved that they had not carried any weapons, Fender and Optica were allowed on the train. When Fender and Optica stepped on the train, Gif Schneider and Atomica Perez greeted them. Gif told Fender that he would mentor him, while Atomica would mentor Optica. Optica and Fender both seemed to understand. The train then began to move, which made Gif pull out a chess set and begin to teach Fender how to play. Atomica clearly disapproved of this form of mentoring, so she invited Optica to another carriage of the train, where they practiced fighting with knives and swords. Once Atomica was confident Optica had perfected basic sword fighting techniques, she took her back to the main carriage, where Gif and Fender were locked in an intense game of chess. Atomica offered Optica some food, while telling her about the upcoming week. Eventually, Gif had locked Fender in a checkmate right as the train entered Snow Station. At the station, many capital citizens seemed to ignore Gif and Atomica, but instead mainly focused on Fender and Optica. Fender and Optica both seemed to enjoy the attention, but Gif called them to the carriage before they could get to know any citizens. After reaching the accommodation center, Gif discovered their stylist, Juno Phipps VI, watching a District X football game on TV. Juno quickly turned off the TV and greeted Gif and Atomica. Gift greeted Juno back and introduced his tributes to him, before walking over to the bar and getting himself a glass of tequila. Juno and his team inspected Optica's unique hair as well as Fender's bulk. After some thinking, Juno asked Optica who had done her hair. Optica told him that she had done it herself. Upon hearing this, Juno pulled out a box of hair dyes and told her to get creative, before telling Gif and Atomica that he was planning on making the tributes look like star explosions. Atomica asked how this had to do with District 3. However, Juno promised her that it would look good. Atomica sighed before turning on the TV and switching to the channel which was broadcasting the reaping of District 1. Because of Dollar Crusoe's Victor's Choice, this year, an extra tribute of each genre was to be reaped. As usual, there were many volunteers eagerly waiting to show off their skills. Of the females, 18-year-olds Marble Cup and Core Walker performed well in the talent demonstrations by amazing the audience with their accuracy with archery. During the debates, Marble and Core seemed to work together to criticize and point out flaws in their competitors' arguments. Therefore, Marble and Core won the roles of female tributes for District X this year. After the females had been reaped, 17-year-old Fishing Garoppolo, yes, I said it right, was voted to the live debates once he demonstrated a variety of skills using different weapons. 18-year-old Quake Stafford was also voted to the live debates after demonstrating extreme agility in the talent demonstration, as well as the ability to hit moving targets. During the live debates, Quake and Fission engaged in a heated debate with each other, and this debate was so heated that the other competitors did not even get a chance to talk. Therefore, the two won the role of male tributes by a landslide of votes. Quake, Fission, Marble, and Core were then taken to the train station after very brief words with their families. On the train, Zashio Throne and Mirai Kobayashi entered the carriage to see the four tributes socializing with each other. Mirai looked at Zashio before walking over to Marble and Core. Mirai told Marble and Core that they had performed really well in the talent demonstrations, which made them thank Mirai. Mirai then asked a peacekeeper to wheel in a set of weapons and a dummy. She then told the two to shoot the dummy in various parts of its body. Marble and Core performed well at this task, but when Mirai told them to do the same with knives, they struggled. Meanwhile, Zashio had watched the girls, and once Core had thrown a knife into the wall, he told the boys to show them how to complete the same task. Quake and Fission walked over, before Fission quickly picked up a spear in his left hand and a knife in his right. Fission then proceeded to slice out the dummy's eyes with each weapon. Quake proceeded to grab an axe before throwing it sideways so that it sliced the dummy's head off the neck. Mirai applauded, which seemed to be a silent cue for the girls to do the same. Zashio and Mirai then led their tributes to the front of the train, where they gave a speech. Mirai told the group to ally with each other, as not all districts had more than 2 tributes, and if they allied with the 4 tributes from District 2, they would be unstoppable. Zashio then gave his usual motivational speech as the train neared the station. Zashio told the tributes what their years of training were about. He emphasized that their performance was about drive and power. He told them to stay hungry and to devour their competition. He told them to remember what was in their veins and to remember what was true to their names. The train then entered Snow Station, which caused a very pumped-up Zashio to open the door and bow to the awaiting viewers. Many capital citizens eagerly watched as Zashio and Mirai led their tributes down the stairs. Marble and Core talked to multiple citizens together, while Fission and Quake assured citizens that they were close friends. Zashio and Mirai then led their tributes to the limousine, which took them to the accommodation center. At the accommodation center, the group's stylists, Cameron Sickle and Beatrix Friend, met them. Cameron and Beatrix introduced themselves to the group, before walking around and examining their various bodily features. Cameron and Beatrix eventually decided to dress the tributes as oars, which represented their district's specialty. After seeing the designs, Zashio seemed pleased, and therefore told Cameron and Beatrix to do their best. He then turned on the TV to Reaping Recap and examined the various weaknesses and strengths of other tributes. The following night, the tribute chariot parade was held. Fission and Quake had their muscles painted to match the color of stone, and were adorned with a variety of different colored gemstone stickers, while Core and Marble were painted similar to the boys, but with a lighter shade of gray, along with some different oars stuck onto their bodies. Wolf Anderson had passed away after catching a virus a month prior to the event. Therefore, Sif was left to comment by herself. Sif clearly disliked the outfits of District 1, claiming that they were too bland. On the other hand, she seemed to enjoy the golden suits and dresses of the tributes from District 2. Sif stated that she liked the way the suits were simple, yet elegant, and the dresses gave off a distinct sparkle. Behind the District 2 carriage, Optica and Fender wore different extravagant colors. However, Sif criticized this, as it was too bright and did not appear to have anything to do with their district. She also seemed to dislike the scaly outfits of District 4, as they were too simple. Eventually, the tributes from District 2 were voted best dressed, as their outfits seemed to be the best of the worst. That night, Zashio allegedly got very mad at Cameron and Beatrix for making utter rubbish, while Mirai tried to talk the tributes into thinking that Zashio did this every year. Eventually, Mirai escorted Cameron and Beatrix out of the apartment, while Quake got Zashio a large bottle of whiskey. Core and Marble went to sleep chattering about Zashio, while Fission waited for Zashio to calm down, before leading Quake to their bedroom, where they had a relatively calm night of sleep. Two apartments above, Fender and Optica talked with Atomica about the training the next day. Atomica told the two about which stations to use, and which stations to avoid. Atomica also suggested finding some allies, as this year, the careers would very likely overpower the rest of the tributes. Fender and Optica thanked Atomica for this information, before heading to their own bedrooms for sleep. In the morning, peacekeepers escorted the tributes down to the training center, where the new head of training, Odin Dalton, greeted them. Odin introduced himself and told the tributes that he would not put up with any horseplay. He then dismissed the tributes to whichever station they liked, before flipping on his taser. Immediately, Midas of 2 walked over and asked why Odin only had one eye. Odin turned around, and facing Midas, he asked if Midas was a 2 boy. Midas nodded and repeated his question. However, Odin told him to go to his station to train. Odin then walked over to his seat, which gave him a view from all of the training center. Frequently, Odin would reprimand one of the peacekeepers for not being able to provide adequate information to the tributes in the survival station. And on other instances, he would tell off tributes that had made mistakes in training. The tributes from District 1 immediately ran over to the tributes from District 2, Dalton, Midas, Themis, and Phoebe. Fission asked Dalton if his last name was Dalton, to which Dalton nodded. Fission laughed. However, Dalton told him that his full name was Dalton. This made Fission laugh even harder, until a peacekeeper approached and asked if everything was alright. Sounds even worse when I say it out loud. Dalton, Midas, Fission, and Quake proceeded to work in the sword station, where they gossiped about the new trading master. Midway through a conversation about Odin's beard, Midas looked around and gasped upon seeing Odin standing right behind them. Midas hastily apologized. However, Odin ordered for the 4 tributes to be put in the fighting zone. He then gave each of them body armor and a sword, before telling them to fight. The 4 did as they were told, and a free-for-all occurred. However, midway through the fight, it became evident that Fission and Quake were trying to avoid hitting each other, while Dalton and Midas did the same. By the end of the fight, Fission and Quake had put up a stronger effort, and according to the rules of the sword fighting station, Fission had won with a score of 19, 16, 13, 12, which is Fission, Quake, Dalton, Midas. Wait, am I even recording? Okay, good. Sorry about that. Meanwhile, Marble and Core had worked with Themis and Phoebe, and upon seeing Odin watching the boys talking about him without them noticing, the girls decided to shoot arrows at cutouts of other tributes. After some time, this seemed to bore Core, and she requested to wrestle someone. Core explained that she had always enjoyed wrestling her older brother, Cena, who was known for being so fast at punching that his opponents couldn't see him. Not a reference. Core asked Odin, which made Odin smile and tell her to wrestle her district partner. Core gasped. However, Marble grinned and the 2 girls were taken to the wrestling ring. Core was clearly more skilled, despite Marble's confidence, and easily beat Marble with a score of 16-8. As for the tributes from District 3, they spent some quiet time in the electronics station, where they attempted to wire circuits. However, after a while of experimenting, Fender accidentally short-circuited his circuit, causing a small spark. Fender began to clean up the accident the proper way. However, Odin walked over and explained some highly advanced physics to Fender about why he had short-circuited. Fender listened to this curiously, and after a while, Odin left to call out Hoover of 5, who had put water into acid in the chemical station. Fender and Optica then spent the remainder of the morning creating circuits and generating lots of electricity using different combinations of batteries. That night, Mirai and Zashio complimented the tributes on successfully forming a bond with the tributes from District 2. Mirai then coached the tributes on which skills to demonstrate during the training assessments the following day, while Zashio watched a wrestling match from District X on TV. Above them, Atomica told the tributes from District 3 about the disadvantages they were at for not making alliances. However, Gift told Atomica to calm down, before telling the tributes what to do for the training assessments the next day. In the morning, the careers were noted to have waited anxiously for the training assessments. Most other tributes seemed nervous to be in the presence of Odin and the not yet revealed head game maker. Quake was assessed first. This year, a new rule allowed game makers to make comments on a tribute's demonstration. However, this comment was meant to be kept secretive, and the game makers were not allowed to reference the activity demonstrated in the comment. For Quake's assessment, he asked for a skateboard to be brought in. He then hopped on the skateboard and asked for the game makers to start moving the targets. The game makers did as told, and soon, Quake was throwing knives and hitting the targets with perfect accuracy while on his skateboard. This seemed to impress the game makers, who gave him a score of 10 for a unique demonstration that was full of talent. After Quake, Fission scored a 9 for showing expertise in a variety of weapons. however failing to be creative. After Fission had been assessed, Marble entered and shot a few arrows at targets with very high accuracy. Surprisingly, this only earned her a 7, as game makers complained that her demonstration was too bland and simple, and had been repeated multiple times in past years. Core then received a score of 6 for copying her district partner. This seemed to enrage her, as she complained that this was not fair. However, Dalton only scored a 5 for allegedly asking for his score early. Midas, of 2, scored a 7, which was also very low for a career. It became clear that for the next few years, the game makers would be grading much harshly. Fender scored a 4, which seemed to surprise him. His comments stated that the circuit he had made was creative, however would not be of much use in the arena unless he wanted to electrocute himself. As for Optica, she scored a 5, which was respectable considering the harsh grading of the game makers. Optica's comments stated that she had created something created and of potential use in the arena. However, the supplies needed to create this item would be very scarce, and unless she received very generous sponsors, most other tributes scored very low scores of 1 or 2. However, very few managed to pull off scores of 5 or more. The next night, interviews were held in Dalton Studios. Sif Heavensby took the stage for her first ever interview night, and it was immediately clear that she was nicer than Odin. Sif welcomed a nervous Marble onto the stage and asked her what she thought about Odin. Marble seemed prepared to insult him. However, she told the audience that she thought Odin was a nice training master and would be something different from Ken or Rubius. Sif spent most of the interview time joking back and forth with Sif, but after a while, she asked questions that the audience was clearly curious to know the answer to. Sif did the same with Core, which seemed to please the audience. After Core had left the stage, Sif welcomed Fission onto the stage. Instead of asking Fission some very generic questions, she asked Fission to introduce himself to the audience. This seemed to catch him off guard. However, Fission told the audience that he came from a very rich family in District 1 and was determined to win the games to bring glory and riches to his hard-working family. After Fission had introduced himself adequately, Sif asked Fission a few questions about his plans if he won the games. Fission replied that he looked forward to returning to District 1 and using it to help the less fortunate of his district. This triggered lots of applause as he left the stage. Quake's interview progressed similarly, with him introducing himself. However, Sif asked him a few questions about his life in District 1, which intrigued the audience. Sif ended the interview off by asking Quake if he thought he would win the games. Quake replied that he did, however he would still remain alert, as there were many ways he could potentially end up dying in the arena. The tributes from District 2 had similar interviews, which left the audience wondering what would happen during the interviews of the Outlier District tributes, as they would be less confident. Once Optica walked on stage, Sif motioned for the audience to clap. This seemed to raise her confidence, as Sif complimented her hair. Optica smiled and thanked Sif, claiming that she had dyed it herself. Sif smiled warmly back at her, before asking her a few simple questions. Once Optica had gotten used to Sif's questions, she seemed to open up a bit and told the audience more and more about her life and hobbies back in District 3. Optica then left the stage and was replaced by Fender. Sif began by asking Fender to introduce himself. Fender seemed unhappy that he had to introduce himself. However, he did so, and gave some details that satisfied the audience. After Fender had introduced himself, Sif sat down and began to chat with him. It became clear that Fender was very happy with his interview when he walked off the stage. The other interviews passed by similarly, which saw many tributes feel good about themselves when they left the stage. A poll sent out after Galen of 12 had been interviewed revealed that the audience preferred Sif over Lauren and Eugenia Ravenstill. Once intermission had ended, the audience fell silent as Sif introduced them to the new head game maker. Smoke flooded Dalton Studios as the game maker walked onto the stage. When the smoke had cleared, the new head game maker, Imperious Barrett, walked on stage. As the brother of former head peacekeeper Dominus Barrett, Imperious stated during his interview that he wanted to avenge his brother's death by making the arena torture. This triggered many oohs and ahs throughout the audience. Throughout his interview, Imperious did not speak much. However, he stated that he was looking forward to the games, and that he had many mutts planned. Many cheers then erupted as the audience cheered Imperious on. Sorry for the redundancy. After a night of mostly restless sleep, the tributes were dressed in a small jacket and waistcoat, as well as some long pants, before being taken to the nearby arena. In the holding rooms, Mirai visited Cor first and wished her luck in the games. Mirai told Cor to not let her training score hold her down, and to win the games. No shit. Mirai told Cor to not let her trading score hold her down. Wait, whoops. The pair then embraced, before Mirai left the room to visit Marble. Marble had spent a lot of time in her holding room waiting for Mirai. And when Mirai finally arrived, Marble held her in a tight hug. Marble promised Mirai that she would win and bring glory to her district, which made Mirai smile and wish her luck. Zashiel had entered Quake's holding room, where he embraced him and wished him luck in the games. Zashiel then told Quake to play to his strengths, and then exited the room to visit Fission. Fission was already doing warm-ups in his holding room when Zashiel entered. Zashiel smiled and told Fission to remember the alliances he had made. Before wishing him luck in the games. The two then embraced, which saw Zashiel smile and pat Fission on the back, while the latter entered his tube. In another holding room, Atomica had wished Optica luck in the games, and apologized for not being able to stop them last year. Optica nodded and thanked Atomica for supporting her through the past week, and quickly entered her tube. Gif had entered Fender's holding room. Fender wished Gif a speedy recovery from his leg surgery, which was scheduled for the next day. This made Gif tear up slightly and tell Fender to expect sponsors. Gif then embraced Fender and watched as Fender entered his tube. Gif continued to watch with slight tears in his eyes as Fender's tube rose into the arena. The 109th Games, or year 123, took place in an arena known as the Mountain of the Yellow River. This year, the cornucopia rested in the center of a large field. Around the cornucopia, there were several rice paddies and abandoned houses. to the north of the cornucopia, there was a large mountain, while to the west, east, and south, the cornucopia was surrounded by a river. Up on the mountain, there were many potential hiding spots for tributes, while in the river, there were many different animals. Across from the river, there was a lot of vegetation. Oh my god. However, the river was very hard to cross due to its rapids and animals. The abandoned buildings did not feature any supplies to tributes, as the game makers had cleared them out when building the arena. Back in the cornucopia, there were several bottles of drinking water, large packets of food, weapons, matches, sleeping bags, and empty backpacks. This amount of supplies was surprisingly large compared to what had been put in the cornucopia in previous years. When his podium rose into the arena, Fender of 3 focused his attention on the food and water, whilst trying to ignore Midas of 2's stares from beside him. A few podiums to their left, Optica of 3 had looked towards Fender. Fender turned his head for a split second to make eye contact with Optica, before the two turned towards the cornucopia. Optica seemed to be focusing her attention on the weapons and backpacks. Meanwhile, Core and Marble had been placed on adjacent podiums, which clearly pleased the two. They then looked towards the boys, before signaling to their allies from District 2. Fishin received this signal and nodded towards Raphael of 8, who was on a podium beside them, while Quake of 1, who was on the other side of Raphael, did the same. Raphael seemed worried about this, but he focused his attention towards the cornucopia. When the gong rang out, most tributes sprinted inwards, likely due to the plethora of supplies in the cornucopia. Quake and Fishin had immediately tackled Raphael, before punching him repeatedly in the head until he was bleeding profusely. Quake and Fishin then ran towards the cornucopia together, where their allies had grabbed weapons and were now facing the other tributes. Core had run forwards and snatched up a bow and arrow, and upon seeing Marble approaching, she stepped aside to make space for her. Core then shot an arrow into Boabia's of 7's chest, which saw her fall to the ground. By then, Marble had picked up a bow and arrow and had begun firing at other tributes. Marble shot Anesthesia of 12 in the heart, and Cuckoo of 9 in the head. Marble and Core then looked around to see the boys grabbing weapons, while the tributes from District 2 ran out and attacked other tributes. Dalton of 2 stabbed Ushanka of 8 in the head with his sword, while Midas threw his axe into Zapote of 11's head. Themis and Phoebe worked together to bring down Fugu and Piranha, both of 4, by closing in on them from either side. Eventually, the tributes had managed to dodge the couriers, were forced to leave the bloodbath without many supplies. Optica and Fender had run towards the cornucopia together. However, the couriers were faster, which saw Fender grab an empty bag while Optica picked up a small knife and water bottle before leaving the bloodbath. After regrouping and hearing 8 cannons sound, Marble, Core, Fishin, Quake, Midas, Dalton, Phoebe, and Themis worked out a plan for the games. The couriers decided that 2 boys and 2 girls, 1 from each district, would go out during the day to hunt for tributes, while the others stayed behind and kept watch over the supplies. This allowed the couriers to eliminate tributes easily, without having to worry about any potential supply guarding problems. It also prevented any of them from turning on each other early. The group agreed, and therefore decided to set up camp at the cornucopia. The 8 of them took out the sleeping bags and placed them down on the ground in a circle. Marble, Themis, Fishin, and Midas then went out to one of the abandoned houses, where they took apart the house for the wood and gathered some rocks. They then returned to the cornucopia, where they set up a campfire and ate some wood together. While the careers rested within the cornucopia, Optica and Fender escaped to the mountains, where they watched the careers grab wood. Fender then suggested that they find some food in the arena, as they had none. Unbeknownst to them, the only source of food in the arena resided in the cornucopia, which was tightly guarded by the career pack. Fender and Optica traveled around the mountain range, looking for other tributes, but fortunately for them, they did not see any. As they began to climb up the mountain range, a tribute, a cannon belonging to Jenner of 12 sounded. Jenner had tried reaching a berry bush that was near the edge of a cliff. However, he lost his footing and fell to his demise below. Once at the top of the mountain, Fender was able to identify the perimeter force field. After a while of searching, Optica told Fender that there were no edible plants anywhere near them. He sighed and replied that the food in the cornucopia seemed to be the only edible food. At that moment, a large sponsor gift floated down, which surprised both of them. Inside the sponsor gift, there was 10 meters of wire, as well as a battery pack. As the cost of the gift was exorbitant, Fender and Optica thanked the sponsors that sent this gift and began to set up a trap, in hopes of finding some food. Optica pointed out that the battery would only provide electricity for a limited time, meaning that they should not leave the battery turned on all the time. Optica and Fender then began to wrap the wire around some trees in the area, before turning on the battery to check that it worked properly. Upon seeing a faint electric glow running down the wire, Fender gave Optica a thumbs up, before turning off the battery. They then set the wire down at shin height on the ground, to prevent any tributes or prey to discover this wire. Back in the cornucopia, the careers had eaten some food and drank some water, while chatting around the fire about their lives in their training centers. After a while, Dalton noticed Zubron of 10, looking towards their camp in the distance. Zubron did not know that Dalton had seen him, but Dalton told the other careers that Zubron was near. Zubron eventually ran over to the cornucopia and hid behind it, presumably to listen in on the careers' conversation. Sid commented that this was a very bold decision, as the careers could easily chase him down and kill him. Once Zubron had crouched on top of the cornucopia, away from the careers' sight, the group became very quiet until Themis signaled that she would attempt to get Zubron to climb down from the cornucopia. Fish and Nodded had signaled that he would do the same from the other side. The two then slowly walked to either side of the cornucopia with their weapons ready. However, as Themis began to climb, Zubron jumped down from the cornucopia and landed on her face. Themis screamed as her head smacked against the ground. However, Zubron had also twisted his ankle very badly, which prevented him from walking. The other careers quickly ran over to see what had happened, which made Zubron pick up Themis' knife and slit her throat along with his own. As Themis' and Zubron's cannons sounded, Quake commented that it was bold of Zubron to have done this, but Midas quickly yelled at the others for not looking over the supplies in this short time. Marble swore and quickly ran back to the cornucopia, and to her dismay, she discovered that some of the supplies had been stolen. Dalton began a swearing frenzy, while Fission and Quake questioned who had taken the supplies. Although night was falling, Marble and Core suggested going after the person who had taken the supplies, as they would still be near. Midas agreed, and to his surprise, Phoebe volunteered to go with them. Dalton then told the girls that they would watch over the rest of the supplies, before wishing them luck. Fission, Quake, Midas, and Dalton stayed in the cornucopia, keeping a careful eye out for tributes, while Marble, Core, and Phoebe entered the forest. As they traveled through the forest, Phoebe asked where they should search first. However, Marble quickly pointed out a speck of orange in the distance. This was Fallow of 10, who had taken the courier's supplies while Zubran had distracted them. Falloa was on the verge of tears when she saw the couriers coming after her. However, she held tightly onto her bread, water, and knife until the girls had seen her. And Falloa sprinted through the forest away from the girls. However, the girls had clearly seen her and were much faster. Sif gasped when Marble chose to pause and load an arrow. Marble then shot her arrow at Falloa, which missed its target by a few feet. Marble swore and loaded another arrow, before running after her fellow couriers. It was Phoebe who had closed in on Falloa, and after tackling her, Core shot an arrow through Falloa's head. Phoebe growled at Core and told her that as she had tackled Falloa, Falloa should have been her kill. Core simply shrugged, but as she walked over to Marble, Marble shot her arrow into Phoebe's neck. Core shuddered and turned around. However, Marble laughed and patted her on the shoulder, before telling her that the courier pack could not afford any traitors. With Core still shuddering, Marble walked over and stripped Falloa's supplies. They then walked back to the cornucopia, where they told the couriers that Phoebe had attempted to ambush Falloa herself, and was therefore stabbed by Falloa. With night falling, Fender and Optica climbed a large tree and rested there, with both of them clearly thirsty and hungry. Other tributes in the arena began to show signs of thirst and hunger as well, which would clearly be a large problem with the couriers guarding the cornucopia. Eventually, the pair figured out a plan, which would involve them finding and killing the couriers the next day, before taking any supplies the couriers may have had. That night, the portraits of Themis of 2, Fugu and Purana both of 4, Poabia of 7, Raphael and Ushanka both of 8, Koku of 9, Zubran and Falloa both of 10, Sapote of 11, and Jenner and Anastasia both of 12 were shown, which left 26 tributes remaining. In the morning, Phoebe, Quake, and Marble decided to guard the supplies at the cornucopia, while Dalton, Midas, Core, and Fission left to hunt for tributes. After having slept around a cozy campfire, the couriers clearly had more energy than many other tributes. In the meantime, Fender and Optica had traveled towards the cornucopia, where they watched the couriers leave the rice fields. Upon seeing Dalton and Midas entering, Fender told Optica to set up the battery trap, where he would try to lure the couriers over. Optica looked at Fender, who reassured her. She then nodded and quickly began to place down the wire. As Dalton and Midas looked to their left, Fission suddenly pointed out something to their right. Midas looked around and noticed the rustling of a bush. Cora then cautiously loaded an arrow and shot at the bush. Fender, who was clearly not expecting this arrow, jumped in pain and quickly ran through the woods, with the arrow still stuck in his arm. As the couriers followed, with Midas throwing his axe. However, he missed, which saw the axe lodged into a tree near Fender. As Fender ran, he hopped over the tripwire, and when the careers were close enough, Optica turned on the battery. Midas and Core tripped over the tripwire, which caused them to collapse to the ground. Upon seeing them getting electrocuted, Dalton and Fission paused in shock. Fission then called Fender a 3-boy. Dalton then bent down to retrieve the supplies from the bodies. However, in a surprise move, Fission sliced Dalton's head off with his sword. Sif and Snow Square gasped. However, Fission smiled and quickly began to gather the drop weapons. However, as he turned to leave, he noticed Optica's bright hair out of the corner of his eye. Fission immediately turned around and looked at Optica, who had gasped upon being noticed high in the tree. Fission yelled at Optica to come down, but unsurprisingly, Optica refused. This made Fission laugh again, and he proceeded to throw a knife, which landed right between her legs. Optica screamed, and at that moment, Fender emerged from behind Fission, and quietly picked up a spear he had not yet picked up earlier. As Fender snuck towards Fission, Optica looked towards him. This allowed Fission to realize that someone was behind him. But as he turned around, Fender thrust the spear into his genitals. Fission screamed painfully as blood poured out. However, Fender apologized and speared him in the head, sounding his cannon. Optica then climbed down from the tree and thanked Fender for sparing her life. As a hovercraft came to collect the bodies, Fender told Optica that now that they had the proper weapons, they could store the battery in their backpack for the time being, and attempt to hunt for actual food. The pair then left the area, as tributes would likely have heard them. Back in the cornucopia, Quake, Marble, and Phoebe seemed worried about hearing the cannons. Phoebe suggested that they investigate the deaths. However, Quake advised against it, as if they left their supplies unattended, other tributes could steal them. He then added that their plan for the games would be to wait it out at the cornucopia, and wait for other tributes to come to them. Phoebe looked towards Quake with an attitude of questions, but Quake simply smiled and looked up at the dead bodies of their fellow careers getting transported away. Phoebe then screamed as Marble shot an arrow into her neck. When Phoebe's cannon sounded, Quake looked towards Marble and pulled her into a tight hug. He then asked if she was ready for a fun time. Marble smiled back and nodded, before stacking the sleeping bags on top of each other, so that they were higher on the ground. Quake and Marble then sat on top of the bags, while being intimate as the sun set. Quake and Marble's intimacy was interrupted by 3 consecutive cannons. Both Marble and Quake jumped, and nearly hurt each other as they looked towards the distance. Fender and Optica had traveled deeper into the forest, where they noticed Fenchurch of 6, Shard of 6, and Ginkgo of 7, eating some bread they had managed to steal during the bloodbath. Fender and Optica decided to set up a wire trap. Once Optica had finished setting up the trap, Fender ran into the cornucopia clearing, where he held up an axe. Not the cornucopia clearing, sorry. Ginkgo screamed, however Shard and Fenchurch picked up their spears and began to run towards Fender. Fender suddenly pretended to panic, and quickly ran towards the trap. As Shard and Fenchurch sprinted towards Fender, Shard suddenly stopped as she noticed Fender make a jump over the wire. Fenchurch was not so lucky, as the thin wire caught onto his legs and shocked him to death on the spot. When Fender turned around to see Shard alive, he threw his axe. This caught Shard off guard, as the axe lodged into her chest. Optica had gone around the other side, and upon seeing Ginkgo running away towards her, Optica thrust her spear through his body. Once the 3 cannons had sounded, Optica and Fender dismantled the traps and picked up the bread. They then ate some of it before climbing a tree and sleeping for the night. Marble and Quake had looked at each other when they saw the hovercraft collecting the bodies. Marble then suggested that she take the first watch, while Quake slept. At nighttime, the portraits of Fission of 1, Core of 1, Dalton of Midas, both of 2, Phoebe of 2, Fentrich and Shard, both of 6, and Ginkgo of 7 were shown, leaving 18 tributes left. Sorry about the pause. I don't know what happened. In the morning, large bull mutts were released into the arena. These bulls had horns sharp enough to pierce human bones. As they climbed a tree, Optica and Fender were fortunate not to have been headbutted. But other tributes were not so lucky. Hoover of 5 was mauled after sleeping on the ground. He was unable to climb a tree fast enough, resulting in his district partner, Julia, watching as his body was retrieved. When Optica woke up, she noticed several of these bulls grazing underneath her tree. However, once it began to rain, Optica noticed a lightning rod in the tree and told them that they would have to move before any lightning strikes. Fender looked like he wanted to use the rod to charge the battery. However, he dropped down some wires before turning on the battery. The bulls were shocked to the point where they did not die but collapsed on the ground. Optica and Fender then climbed down from the tree before running to another area. Rambutan of 11 was not so lucky. As he tried to avoid the bulls, lightning had struck his tree, which led to him burning up and falling to the ground, where he was killed by the bulls. As for Quake and Marble, they had noticed some bulls gradually traveling onto the rice paddies. Quake seemed worried, but Marble suggested that they climb the cornucopia. They did just that, and fortunately for them, the bulls were unable to attack them on top of the cornucopia. From there, Marble was able to kill the bulls by firing arrows into their heads. Once the bulls had left the cornucopia, Marble and Quake descended. Quake then pulled out some knives and watched the thunder hitting the trees in the distance. Once the thunder had cleared out, Game Maker Barrett ordered the mutts to retreat through a sealed hole in the ground. He then turned up the heat in the arena, which made some tributes move closer to the cornucopia, where it was cooler. This led to several deaths. Although neither of them had weapons, Tux and Parga, both of 8, encountered Lucuma and Persimmon, both of 11. Tux and Parga immediately tackled the 2 tributes and ignored their pleas for mercy. They then punched them multiple times, killing them. Julia, a 5, had run onto the beach. Quake noticed her and threw a knife at her, killing her before she had even realized that the couriers were there. When the thunder had cleared out, Fender and Optica descended from a large tree and began to lay wire around on the ground. Fender then put the backpack, some bread, and a sword down on the ground, making it look like a tribute had died there. Rambutan of 11 had in fact died there. However, the girls from his district had cleaned up his supplies, leaving only his blood. With night slowly closing in, Fender and Optica were unable to lure any tributes near them, but they did eat some of their remaining food while begging for water. As the sun set, rain began to fall on the arena again. This seemed to relieve some of the tributes from the cold. However, the afternoon rain soon turned into acid rain. Fender and Optica chose to hide under a tree for shelter. However, the acid liquid used in the rain was able to eat through the leaves, and soon enough, the tributes were forced to find cover in the form of small caves. They had also taken their supplies from underneath the tree, albeit not finding any tributes. Marble and Quake had simply stepped into the cornucopia, where they became intimate as the acid rain poured down outside. At midnight, the portraits of Hoover and Julia, both of 5, Rambutan of 11, Lucuma and Persimmon, both of 11, were shown, which left only 13 tributes alive. Civ told viewers that she thought one of the 4 remaining tributes from 12 would win, as they had strength in numbers, but her ideas were generally disregarded. This is day 4. In the morning, more mutts were released. This time, they were released from the river. Blenny and Thomas, both of 4, who had chosen to settle down near the river, were shocked to see alligators coming towards them. Blenny was able to escape, but due to the alligators' quick speed, Thomas was bitten on the leg, causing him to stumble and get eaten by another alligator. Quake and Core also noticed these alligators, which forced them to retreat out of the cornucopia as the alligators devoured the supplies. Now in the forests of the mountains, Quake and Core chose to head up to the top of the mountain. As they were walking, Core heard voices to their left. Quake quickly held up a hand and mouthed that he could hear people talking as well. These 4 voices belonged to the tributes from 12, who were arguing about their water supply. Quake and Marble quickly chose to split up, and as Penicillin was about to slap Galen, Marble's arrow flew through his skull and out of his mouth. Galen screamed, and so did Placebo and Adrena, as Quake entered the clearing and threw 2 knives at the girls. The knives hit the girls in the heart and the neck, respectively, which killed them before they hit the ground. Galen had run out of the clearing and towards the cornucopia. Quake and Marble chased him, and it was clear the careers were faster. Marble shot an arrow, which hit him in his spine. Once Galen's body had been retrieved, Quake pointed out something to his side. Marble had also noticed this, and when Sif changed the camera angle, viewers could see that it was Optica's hair. Marble laughed and walked over, before shooting Optica in the head. As the cannon sounded, Quake hugged her and told her that fashion had no place in the arena. Meanwhile, Fender had seen Optica collapse while he was hiding in a bush. However, he slowly focused on not being seen by the careers. As Quake and Marble left towards the cornucopia, Fender very slowly climbed out of the bush and took Optica's supplies. He then apologized to her and looked very sadly at the arrow in her skull. When the hovercraft had finally arrived to retrieve her body, Fender turned around and traveled her up the mountain, in the direction opposite to where the careers had gone. After some traveling, Fender was able to scale a tall tree, which gave him a good view of the arena. From there, he was able to see Blenny of 4 and Ollie of 9 chatting, while Parka and Tux, both of 8, were chatting. As well, Fender appeared to consider asking to join an alliance. However, he seemed more scared that the others would turn on him. Fender then set up the wire trap near Parka and Tux. He then laid a sword on the ground before making a bird's call. Parka and Tux immediately ran over, but upon seeing the sword, Parker correctly guessed that it was a trap. Tux appeared pensive. However, at that moment, Fender emerged from behind and slammed his axe into Tux's body. Parka screamed as Fender tried to punch her. However, she was able to avoid his punch. Unfortunately for Parka, she had stumbled backwards and right into Fender's wire trap. Parka was electrocuted in the back, which killed her as well. Sif then declared Fender a dark horse for this year's games, as she was open-mouthed and shocked at what he had done. As night fell, Ollie and Blenny retreated to a small grove near the river, where there were no crocodiles. The two then started a small fire, which they put out as the sun set. At midnight, the portraits of Optica of 3, Thomas of 4, Tux and Parka, both of 8, and Penicillin, Galen, Placebo, and Adrena, all of 12, were shown. This left Quake and Marble, both of 1, Fender of 3, Plenty of 4, and Ollie of 9 remaining. In the morning, game maker Barrett made an announcement, telling tributes that a swarm of wasps would be released from the perimeter. Although his announcement was short, the buzzing the wasps produced was enough to cause the remaining tributes to head towards the cornucopia. Fender immediately ran towards the cornucopia, and from the point where he was hiding, he set up the wire trap. He then turned on the battery, which caused an electric current to flow through the wire. When Marble heard this announcement, she exclaimed that it was kind of the game makers to warn the other tributes before releasing the wasps, which made Quake laugh. The two sat on the top of the cornucopia, where they watched the other tributes running towards the cornucopia. While the others approached the rice paddies, Marble pulled out a spear and yelled at any tributes in the vicinity to approach them. After she had said this, a cannon sounded. This cannon belonged to Oli of 9 after he had been stung to death by several large wasps. With only 4 tributes remaining, the wasps hovered around, but did not attempt to sting any tributes. Eventually, it was Blenny who ran out of the rice paddy he was hiding in and into the cornucopia. He seemed very confused when he did not find any tributes. Unfortunately for him, just as he looked up, Marble jumped down and landed on him. Marble then stabbed him multiple times with an arrow, killing him. As Blenny's cannon sounded, Marble warned Quake to keep an eye out for the final tribute. Quake quickly climbed down from the cornucopia, but as he was about to pick up his knives, Marble shot him in the neck. Quake looked at Marble as he fell down, and his cannon sounded seconds later. Marble then picked up her bow, just as Fender entered the clearing. Marble seemed delighted to see Fender, and as she loaded her bow, Fender threw his axe. Marble was forced to roll over to avoid the axe. Fender, who was now weaponless, shouted at Marble and began to run towards the forest. As he ran, Marble fired several arrows into his back. However, he did not collapse at all. When he was near the wire trap, Marble fired her penultimate arrow, which hit Fender in the shoulder. Fender shouted in pain and jumped over the wire. Fender then began to writhe in pain as Marble walked over. Viewers in Snow Square began to yell at Marble to watch out for the wire. However, Marble did not notice. Once she was a few meters away, Fender begged Marble for mercy. However, Marble simply laughed at him and told him that she would kill him personally. As she walked over to Fender, she tripped over the wire and dropped her bow. Marble screamed as her legs were shocked. Fender then quickly stood up and pushed the rest of Marble's body onto the wire. As Marble's cannon sounded, Fender collapsed again as Game Maker Blanco Barrett... Wait, what? As Game Maker Barrett announced that Fender Hindenburg was the victor of the 109th Hunger Games. After being lifted out of the cornucopia, Fender was immediately taken to Ravenstill Hospital, where he was given urgent care for a severely injured back. Fortunately for him, the arrows had not pierced any major arteries, which allowed him to survive without much treatment. In the time leading up to his victor's interview, Fender played a lot of chess with GIF. For his interview, Fender was dressed in a black suit and tie, along with a single stripe of yellow down his back. Sif greeted Fender politely and asked him the usual questions. Fender answered them honestly, until Sif asked him what his plans were for the future. Fender told Sif that he wanted to live a quiet life in the Victor's village, and did not say much more. Sif seemed slightly offended that Fender did not say more. However, she thanked Fender for his time and ended his interview. After the games, Fender returned home, where he moved into his house in the Victor's Village with his family. A couple years later, Fender became a quiet person who enjoyed listening to rock music. He later learned to play the bass guitar, and occasionally visited Giff to play chess with him. The following year, Fender played a role as the secret assassin in the games.